what I want to talk about this week is, I didn't get to this last week, but I still want to talk about the history of Nicaragua this week, because Nicaragua approves reforms boosting power of President Ortega and his wife, right? So we're going to read about what is going on currently in Nicaragua, and we're going to talk about how it got to that point, all right? So I said legislators greenlight reforms giving more authority to Daniel Ortega and Rosario Murillo, accused of stifling dissent. All right. So it said legislators in Nicaragua have approved a constitutional amendment that will strengthen the power of longtime President Daniel Ortega, who has been accused of cracking down on critics and political challengers. Right. Daniel Ortega is the type, evidently, or at least that's what this article is trying to allege, that he is the type that just wants power and just wants to consolidate power. He just wants to be in power. The reforms which 79-year-old Ortega sent to Congress this week as a matter of urgency were approved unanimously on Friday by 91 lawmakers. So they seem to be somewhat, as I said, unanimous in this, in keeping power in the hands of Ortega. The changes elevate Ortega's wife and vice president, Rosario Murillo, to the post of co-president, all right, because he wants somebody like him to be able to make decisions when he can't, right? They also increased the presidential term in the Central American nation from 5 to 6 years and extend the executive's control over the media. All right, they could use more propaganda in the media, I suppose. According to the Nicaraguan Constitution, reforms must be approved in a second legislative period, in this case in 2025, before they become effective. All right, so another check and balance. That's good to have when it comes to these parliaments and congresses and whatnot. Rights groups and international observers slammed the vote as a sham and accused the Sandinista leader, remember that term, Sandinista, they're going to come back later, leader of stifling dissent by trying to legalize the absolute power Ortega and his wife already wield in the country, right? So dissenters are saying, hey, y'all already have absolute power. Y'all just been wielding it illegally. They're trying to make that legal, right? Like silencing critics and whatnot. The reform not only reflects the paranoia and insecurity of the Sandinista dictatorship, but also codifies a system that has no exact precedent in Latin America, dangerously resembling the North Korean model, wrote exiled opposition leader Felix Maradiaga in the online media outlet Divergentes. All right, so he said, it's becoming like North Korea now, which, I mean, it sounded like there was votes going on, maybe not. These modifications reflect a desperate attempt to shield the Ortega-Murillo family from an eventuality. What is that eventuality? All right, so it said Ortega first served as president from 85 to 90, returned to power in 2007. He secured a fourth consecutive term as president in 2021 after an election campaign that was marked by a months-long crackdown on dissent and the arrest of dozens of opposition figures, including several presidential hopefuls, right? So he was arresting people who opposed his election. Ortega's government has shut down more than 5,000 NGOs since mass protests broke out against his rule in 2018. About 300 people died in the unrest, according to the UN, right? So he's been silencing protesters, silencing them in the only real sense of silencing protesters, which is putting them to death. Meanwhile, thousands of Nicaraguans have fled into exile, often to neighboring Costa Rica, and the United States and the European Union have imposed a series of sanctions against Ortega's administration, right? So the U.S. is against the not only Ortega, but the Sandinistas, all right? So Nicaragua is being stripped of its intellectual capital and critical voices. The UN panel warned last year. Friday's constitutional amendment stipulates that traitors to the homeland can be stripped of their citizenship, something Ortega has already done with hundreds of politicians, journalists, intellectuals, and activists perceived as critical of his government, right? So anybody criticizing the Ortega administration, hey, he said, we can strip them of your citizenship and ship them out, right? Deport them. It also gives the co-presidents the power to coordinate all legislative, judicial, electoral control, and supervisory bodies, regional and municipal, right? So it gives the co-president the ability of the president, basically. The Organization of the American States, a regional body, has slammed the reforms as a definitive attack on the democratic rule of law. Through these modifications to the fundamental law, Ortega and his allies seek to increase their absolute control of the state and perpetuate themselves in power, the group said in a statement on Wednesday. All right, the Sandinistas, Ortega being the leader of the Sandinistas, are trying to perpetuate themselves in power and trying to silence dissenters. All right, so is that it? Okay, cool. So with that, let's get a little bit of history on why and how the Sandinistas came about. All right. So this is just general history of Nicaragua, and I know that it's Wikipedia, right? So take it with a grain of salt, but also Wikipedia draws from a lot of different sources. That's why I use Wikipedia. All right, Wikipedia itself is not a source; it draws from a lot of different sources. All right, so let's even start with the history of the name Nicaragua, where it came from. All right. Okay, so it was previously believed that the name. Oh, come on. This is why I don't like. This is the only thing about Wikipedia I don't like using. It won't let me highlight stuff. But anyway, it said it was previously believed that the name Nicaragua was coined by Spanish colonists based on the name Nicaragua, which was a cacique of a powerful Nahua tribe encountered by the Spanish conquistador Gil Gonzalez de Villa. However, I'm jumping down to the next paragraph. However, this etymology is considered to be outdated by most historians, as in 2002 it was discovered that the real name of the cacique was Maquil Miquitzal, or Miquitzali, and not Nicaragua, right? So I'm just going to keep reading this. As I said, it had been discovered that the Nicaraguans called their land Nicanawak. All right, which most historians now believe is a true etymology of Nicaragua. It means here lies Anahuac. And as it goes on to later say, in Nahuatl, right, Nahuatl is the same family, like same language family as the Aztecs and the Mayans. All right, and that's what we're about to read later about the people who originally inhabited Nicaragua. All right, so Nican in Nahuatl means here, and Anahuac, which is in turn a combination of the words atl and Nahuac, a located meaning surrounding. Therefore, the literal translation of Nicanawak is here surrounded by water. All right, and then when the Spanish heard that, they heard Awak or atl is water, so they said Nican Agua, right? Nicaragua. That's like here surrounded by water. It's a mix between the Nahuatl language and the Spanish language. All right, that's what Nicaragua is. All right, so, whoa, that's not what I meant to do. All right, so let's go down into the pre-Columbian history. It says, yeah, we're not getting into the Paleo-Indian because this is all lies. About 12,000 years BC. No. So it says at the end of the 15th century, Western Nicaragua was inhabited by several indigenous peoples related by culture to the Mesoamerican civilizations of the Aztec and Maya. You see that right there? Because the Aztecs descend from Tola, or the Toltecs, that's Issachar, and the Maya descend from Zebulun. All right, the two different tribes of Israel. The fifth and sixth sons of Leah, specifically, Jacob had 4 different wives. Issachar and Zebulun both come from Leah. They are related. All right, the Issachar and Zebulunites. All right, they said the Corotegas were Mangue, language ethnic groups who had arrived in Nicaragua from what is now the Mexican state of Chiapas, sometime around 800 CE. Right, so notice, and it says the Nicaragua people were a branch of Nahuas who spoke the Nahuatl dialect, also came from Chiapas around 1200 CE. So notice that they're really, because, they said, 12,000 BC, right? So what happened between 12,000 BC and 800 and 1200 to where that, nobody was there? It don't make no sense. And if you believe the Bible, you don't believe that anybody inhabited anything 12,000 in 12,000 BC. The earth does not go back that far. But notice the first inhabitants of the land of Nicaragua didn't even get there until the Middle Ages, 800 CE, 1200 CE. All right. So prior to that, the Nicaraguans had been associated with the Toltec civilization. All right. So both the Corotegas, the Toltec civilization being the children of Tola. All right, children of Issachar. Both Cortegas and Nicaraguas originated in Mexico's Cholula Valley and migrated south. Third group, the Septiabas, were an Otomanguean people who migrated from the Mexican state of Guerrero around 1200 CE. So notice a lot of the people, and even it says additionally there were trade-related colonies in Nicaragua set up by the Aztecs starting in the 14th century. So a lot of people didn't even, nobody really inhabited Nicaragua until the Middle Ages. You had people who were moving south from like Mexico, from Mexico and the Yucatan. That's where the people really inhabited, was Mexico and the Yucatan. All right. So let's get into some of this Spanish era history. I don't really want to touch on what maybe we'll cross-reference this that Wikipedia is talking about, but I have a book known as Destruction of the Indies by Bartolomé de las Casas. All right, a brief account of the destruction of the Indies by Bartolomé de las Casas. And we went into this book before to talk about Latin American history. All right, it's a good reference book to have when you're talking about the history of Latin America. And this is chapter 6 of the province of Nicaragua. All right, it said the said tyrant. Now this tyrant, as it says in 1522, so we can reference back over here, and it says in 1522, Gonzalez de Villa. This is Gil Gonzalez de Villa. That's who this wicked tyrant is. All right, Gil Gonzalez de Villa. All right. So this is Bartolomé de las Casas writing this. The said tyrant in the year of 1522. That's Anno Domini 1522 AD. All right, proceeded farther, very unfortunately, to the subjugation of conquest of this province. In truth, no person can satisfactorily or sufficiently express the fertility, temperateness of the climate, or the multitude of the inhabitants of Nicaragua, which was almost infinite and admirable. You see that right there? So Bartolomé de las Casas said, you can't really even explain with words how beautiful this place was before Spain showed up. All right. He said, for this region contained some cities that were 4 miles long, and the abundance of fruits of the earth, which was the cause of such a concourse of people, was highly commendable. The people of this place, because the country was level and plain, destitute of mountains, so very delightful and pleasant that they could not leave it without great grief. And much dissatisfaction, they were therefore tormented with the greater vexations and persecutions, and forced to bear the Spanish tyranny and servitude. With as much patience as they were masters of, add farther that they were peaceable and meek-spirited. You see that right there? So these were peaceful and meek-spirited people compared to the Spaniards. This tyrant with these accomplices of his cruelty did afflict this nation, whose advice he made use of in destroying the other kingdoms, with such and so many great damages, slaughters, injustice, slaver, and barbarism, that a tongue, though of iron, could not express them all fully. Right, so he's saying like even a machine couldn't count all the different ways that the Spaniards subjugated this people. All right, he sent into the province, which is larger than the country of Rusinia, 50 horsemen, who put all the people to the edge of the sword, sparing neither age nor sex upon the most trivial and inconsiderable occasion. As for example, if they did not come to them with all possible speed when called, and bring the imposed burden of mahid, which signifies corn in their dialect, right? So if they didn't bring enough resources, or if they did not bring the number of Indians required to his own, and the service or rather servitude of his associates, and the country being all campaign or level, no person was able to withstand the hellish fury of their horses. You see that right there. So they were destroyed, they were killed, and tortured if they weren't able to bring the resources that the Spaniards required of them. It's a similar story to what happened throughout all the Caribbean islands and throughout the whole Caribbean region. All right. He commanded the Spaniards to make excursions, that is, to rob other provinces, permitting and granting these thieving rogues leave to take away by force as many of these peaceable people as they could, right, to enslave these people, who being ironed, that they might not sink under the burden of 60 or 80 pound weight. It frequently happened that of 4,000 Indians, 6 only returned home, and so they died by the way. Right, so the Spaniards were so careless with these people and literally working them to death. All right, they did not care. They would throw them into whatever mine, whatever burden was cast upon them as far as like, bring us such and such amount of gold, bring us such and such amount of corn, bring us this, bring us that. And if they didn't, they would kill them, and they didn't care how much it was and whether that were even possible or not, right? So the people would literally work themselves to death. All right. Only six only returned home out of 4,000, it says, and so they died by the way. But if any of them chanced to faint, being tired with overweighty burdens, or through great hunger and thirst should be seized with a distemper, or too much debility and weakness that they might not spend time in taking off their fetters, they beheaded them, right? So if they were worked and passed out, and not just worked to death, if they just passed out, or if, they passed out due to, hunger or thirst or whatever, they would kill them. All right? They beheaded them. So the head fell one way and the body another. The Indians, when they spied the Spaniards making preparations for such journeys, knowing when they saw the Spaniards coming, knowing what exactly? Knowing very well that few or none returned home alive, just upon their setting out with sighs and tears, burst out into these or the like expressions, right? So that when they saw the Spaniards coming, they started crying or sighing or, whichever the case may be, because they knew, this is where we die, basically. Those were journeys which we traveled frequently in the service of Christians, but in some tract of time we returned to our habitations, wives and children. But now there being no hope of a return, we are forever deprived of their sight and conversation, right? So he said, look, we as Christians showed up, tried to do our missionary work, but now there's no people left. So what can we do? Because that's what Bartolome de las Casas was. He was a friar or a bishop. I can't remember exactly, but he was sent by the Catholic Church to convert people. So when he saw all the things going down that the Spaniards were doing to the people, he's like, look, there's no more people to convert. Y'all killing everybody. All right. So it said it happened also that the same president would dissipate or disperse the Indians de novo at his own pleasure, to the end, as it was reported, he might violently force the Indians away from such as did infest or molest him, and dispose of them to others, right? So you'd have some people coming to him like, hey, we need food, right? And he's like, get off me, and he'd kill him. All right. Upon which it fell out that for the space of a year complete, there was no sowing or planting. He said right there, so the people would come to him and say like, hey, look, we need to grow crops or we're all going to die. He didn't care. All right, this Davila guy. All right. So that for a whole year, they didn't grow crops because they couldn't. The Spaniards were forcing them to do all sorts of labor and stuff. They couldn't grow anything. And when they wanted bread, the Spaniards did by force plunder the Indians of the whole stock of corn that they had laid up for the support of their families. And by these indirect courses, above 30,000 above 30,000 perished with hunger. You see that right there? So they died from the famine. Nay, it fortuned at one time that a woman oppressed with insufferable hunger deprived her own son of his life to preserve her own. You see that right there? So it's describing the same thing that happened with the children of Israel that happened in the siege. All right, and when the siege of Samaria was besieged twice. Jerusalem was besieged twice. All right, the siege of Samaria by the Syrians, and the siege of Samaria by the Assyrians, and the siege of Jerusalem by the Babylonians, and then later on the Romans. All right, these are all curses of Deuteronomy 28, and we'll get into that a little later. In this province also they brought many to an untimely end, loading their shoulders with heavy planks and pieces of timber, which they were compelled to carry to a haven 40 miles distant, in order to their building of ships, sending them likewise into the mountains to find out honey and wax, where they were devoured by tigers. And right here, when he's talking about tigers, I'm pretty sure he's talking about leopards. There's no tigers native to the Central America habitats, but leopards are definitely down there. Nay, they loaded women impregnated with carriage and burdens fit for beasts. All right, so they would load up pregnant women doing this as well. They didn't care about old or young. They didn't care. It's about to say that, I believe. It says, but no greater pest was there that could unpeople this province than the license granted by the Spaniards, or granted the Spaniards by this governor, to demand captives from the caciques and the potents, potentates of this region, for at the expiration of 4 or 5 months, or as often as they obtain leave of the governor to demand them, they deliver up 50 servants. And the Spaniards terrified them with menaces, that if they did not obey them in answering their unreasonable demands, they should be burnt alive or baited to death by dogs. You see that right there? So you had the rulers of this region were forced to bring slaves, bring servants. All right? And if they didn't, then they themselves would be killed. All right? So just keep that in mind about the mentality of the rulers of this region. All right? And we'll show that it actually existed before this, but when the Spaniards came, when Esau came, he said, look, you got to give up your people or we're going to kill you. You have to be an oppressor to your people or we're going to kill you. All right? So, as it says, baited to death by the dogs. Now the Indians are but slender, stored with servants, for it is much if a cacique had 3 or 4 in his retinue, therefore they have recourse to the subjects. And when they had in the first place seized the orphans, they required earnestly and instantly one son of the parent who had but 2, and 2 of him that had but 3. And for the lord of the place, satisfied with the desires of the tyrant, not without the effusion of tears and groans of the people, who, as it seems, were very careful of their children, as you would be, like as parents, right? You would be careful for your children. And this being frequently repeated in the space between the year 1523 and 1533, right, for 10 years, the kingdom lost all their inhabitants. For in 6 or 7 years' time, there were constantly 5 or 6 ships made ready to be freighted with Indians that were sold in the regions of Panama and Perusium, right? So they would ship, and Wikipedia says the same thing, that they would ship slaves from the Nicaraguan region and have them to work on slave plantations in Panama and Peru, all right, where they all died. For it is by daily experience proved and known that the Indians, when transported out of their native country into any other, soon die, because they are shortened in their allowance of food, and the task imposed on them no ways diminished, they being only bought for labor. They would literally work them to death and not feed them. So, of course, they're going to die. And by this means, there have been taken out of this province 500,000. All right, so what's the next one say? It was taken out of Nicaragua, 500,000 inhabitants and upward, who before were free men and made slaves. And in the wars made on them and the horrid bondage they were reduced into, 50 or 60,000 more have perished. And to this day, very many still are destroyed. Now, all these slaughters have been committed within the space of 14 years, inclusively, possibly in this province of Nicaragua. There remains 4,000 or 5,000 men who were put to death by ordinary and personal oppressions. Whereas, according to what it is said already, it did exceed other countries of the world in multitude of people. Right? So, it was taken down from, he said, exceeded other countries of the world in multitude of people, right? Like you couldn't count the number of people, down to 4,000 or 5,000 men at that time. All right, so that's the kind of stuff that they went through whenever Spain showed up. All right, just destroyed everything. All right, so let's jump down to, it says the Act of Independence of Central America dissolved the captaincy general of Guatemala in September 1821, right? So Spain was kicked out around 1821, and Nicaragua soon became part of the first Mexican Empire. In July of 1823, after the overthrow of the Mexican monarchy, in March of the same year, Nicaragua joined the newly formed United Provinces of Central America, a country later known as the Federal Republic of Central America, and Nicaragua definitively became an independent republic in 1838. All right, so from the early 1500s, right, 1522 is what we was just reading, all the way up till 1838. That's how long Spain was there doing stuff like that. All right. So from there, let's jump on down to where in the United States occupation. All right. In 1909, the U.S. supported the forces rebelling against President Zelaya, and U.S. motives included differences over the proposed Nicaragua Canal. So originally, they wanted and where the Panama Canal is now, they wanted to go through Nicaragua because, again, the name Nicaragua means here surrounded by the waters. They got plenty of lakes and rivers, right? So it'd be a lot easier to build a canal going into one of those rivers than it would be just to plow all the dirt out of anywhere else, right? Like they ended up eventually doing with the Panama Canal. It would have been a lot easier for them to make a canal into one of the rivers in Nicaragua and just, build on the other side as well to have it flow through, right? It said U.S. motives included differences over the proposed Nicaragua Canal, Nicaragua's potential to destabilize the region, and Zelaya's attempts to regulate foreign access to Nicaraguan natural resources, right? So they didn't like Zelaya there because Zelaya was actually standing up for the people, all right? And it said on November 18th in 1909, U.S. warships were sent to the area after 500 revolutionaries, including 2 Americans, were executed by the order of Zelaya. You see that right there? So Zelaya said, no, you're not overthrowing my government that easy. The U.S. justified the intervention by claiming to protect U.S. lives and property, and it said Zelaya resigned later that year. So they came to Zelaya and they're like, look, we're going to either replace you by killing you, or you can resign. And Zelaya's like, no, I'm resigning. I'm out of here. All right. So from there, I don't want to read all this, but it says the U.S. Marines occupied Nicaragua from 1912 to 1933, except for a 9-month period beginning in 1925. All right, so they were there until 1933, in and out, I suppose. But in 33, that's when they ended up leaving. And it says from 27 to 33, Rebel General Sandino led a sustained guerrilla war against the regime and then against the U.S. Marines, who he fought for over 5 years. When the Americans left in 33, they set up the National Guard, a combined military and police force trained and equipped by the Americans and designed to be loyal to U.S. interests. You see that right there. So when the U.S. left, they didn't just leave. They set up the National Guard there, who would, be on, maybe not so much on the U.S. payroll, but they were there to support the U.S. and U.S. interests, all right? So it says, in January 33, Sandino and the newly elected administration of President Sacasa reached an agreement that Sandino would cease his guerrilla activities in return for amnesty, a land grant for agricultural colony, and retention of an armed band of 100 men for a year. However, due to the growing hostility between Sandino and the National Guard director, Somoza Garcia, and a fear of armed opposition from Sandino, Somoza Garcia ordered his assassination. Sacasa invited Sandino for dinner and to sign a peace treaty at the presidential house on the night of February 21st, 1934. And after leaving the presidential house, Sandino's car was stopped by National Guard soldiers and they kidnapped him. Later that night, Sandino was assassinated by the National Guard. Later, hundreds of men, women, and children from Sandino's agricultural colony were murdered. You see that right there. So Sandino, he wanted what was best for Nicaragua, but not while the U.S. Interests prevail. All right. And it said there's been several military dictatorships from them, the longest being the hereditary dictatorship of the Somoza family. All right. So, and that's what we just read about with Garcia there, the National Guard director. All right. So his family is the ones who kept it going. All right. They're the ones that have been in rulership up until 72. Yeah, up until 72. And it said, all right, so it said an earthquake in 72 destroyed nearly 90% of Managua being a city, all right, including much of its infrastructure. Instead of helping to rebuild the city, Somoza siphoned off relief money. The mishandling of relief money also prompted a baseball star, Roberto Clemente, to personally fly to Managua on December 31st, 1972, but he died en route in an airplane accident. Yeah, imagine that. Somebody coming down to help, and he just so happened to coincidentally die in a plane accident. Even the economic elite were reluctant to support Somoza as he had acquired monopolies in industries that were key to rebuilding the nation. You see that right there. So even the wealthy people in the city didn't want to help rebuild it because of Somoza. Because of his corruption, they said, look, you're just going to steal our money anyway. The Somoza family was among a few families or group of influential firms which reaped most of the benefits of the country's growth from the 50s to the 70s, When Somoza was deposed by the Sandinistas in 79, the family's worth was estimated to be between 500 million and 1.5 billion. All right, so the Sandinistas are the ones who overthrew Somoza and that Somoza family. All right, so it says in 61, right? So we're jumping a little bit back, but it said in 61, Carlos Fonseca looked back to the historical figure of Sandino, right, the guy who wanted the National Guard out. And along with two other people, one of whom was believed to be Casimiro Sotelo, who was later assassinated, founded the Sandinista National Liberation Front, right? So the Sandinistas were found in the 60s. After the 72 earthquake and Somoza's apparent corruption, the ranks of the Sandinistas were flooded with young, disaffected Nicaraguans who no longer had anything to lose. All right, you see that right there? So in 72, when things got bad with that earthquake, all right, that's when people started flooding to the Sandinistas. That's when the youth started, coming to the Sandinistas. So it said in 74, I'm not going to necessarily get into the Civil War. We're going to jump to the Contras. All right. But no, it is the Sandinistas, all right, who are trying to take control here, starting in 79, I guess is what it said. They took control of this, from the Somoza family in 79. All right. So it says, in response to the Sandinistas, various rebel groups collectively known as the Contras, so it's not even, the Contras aren't even one group, all right? It's a collection of groups, were formed to oppose the new government, right? Formed to oppose the Sandinistas. Remember, the Somoza family held the U.S. interest, right? Held the U.S. interest, and they were doing things for big business, right? Okay, well, the Sandinistas overthrew them in 79. So now we're in the 80s here, and the Sandinistas trying to get Nicaragua back on track as a country, but here come the Contras, all right? The Contras were formed to oppose the new government. The Reagan administration ultimately authorized the CIA to help the Contra rebels with funding, weapons, and training. The Contras operated from camps in the neighboring countries of Honduras to the north and Costa Rica to the south, right? So the U.S., specifically the CIA, is, training and funding these rebel groups coming from Honduras and Costa Rica, all right? So it says they engaged in a systematic campaign of terror among rural Nicaraguans to disrupt the social reform projects of the Sandinistas, right? They're always trying to do something, all right? Always trying to start something, right? So it says several historians have criticized the Contra campaign and the Reagan administration's support for the Contras, citing the brutality and numerous human rights violations of the Contras, alleging that health centers, schools, and cooperatives were destroyed by rebels, that murder, rape, and torture occurred on a large scale in Contra-dominated areas. You see that right there. So the Contras, they were not good people. The Contras were not good people at all. All right. So let's finish this out. It said the U.S. also carried out a campaign of economic sabotage and disrupted shipping by planting underwater mines in Nicaragua's port of Corinto. Right. So they didn't want no kind of business being done if it wasn't a U.S. business. All right. And action condemned by the International Court of Justice as illegal. Right. Imagine that. The ICJ said, no, U.S. are doing things that, are illegal, right? Things that are violate humanitarian law, all right? The court also found the U.S. encouraged acts contrary to humanitarian law by producing the manual Psychological Operations in Guerrilla Warfare and disseminating it to the Contras. The manual, among other things, advised on how to rationalize killings of civilians. The U.S. also sought to place economic pressure on the Sandinistas, and the Reagan administration imposed a full trade embargo, all right, on Nicaragua. But I ain't gonna sit here and make it seem like the Sandinistas were perfect. There were Jesus down there. Obviously not. The Sandinistas were also accused of human rights abuses. Come on now. Were accused of human rights abuses, including torture, disappearances, and mass executions. All right, so the Sandinistas here, at best, is the lesser of two evils. All right. At worst, you got two evil groups trying to rule the country. But Sandinistas, they may be the lesser of two evils in this case. All right. So it says in the Nicaraguan general elections of '84, which were judged by at least one visiting 30-person delegation of NGO representatives, to have been free and fair, right? So they said that there was a free and fair election in 84. It says the Sandinistas won the parliamentary election and their leader, Daniel Ortega, remember Daniel Ortega? Won the presidential election, all right? So he originally won the presidential election. And this is the current president that they have now. The 79-year-old president that they have now originally won in the election of 84 to start his rule in 85, all right? So then we get to the end of the Civil War. In 83, the U.S. Congress prohibited federal funding of the Contras, but the Reagan administration illegally continued to back them by covertly selling arms to Iran and channeling the proceeds to the Contras in the Iran-Contra affair, right? Which was technically high treason, right? There's a clip going around about American the clip is from American Dad, the TV show. They're explaining this whole Iran-Contra situation of Ollie North, all right, and the situation going on there. But, okay. So I'll finish out this one. For which several members of the Reagan administration were convicted of felonies. You see that right there? Doing something illegal. They were arrested. The International Court of Justice, in regard to the case of Nicaragua v. United States in 86, found the United States of America was under an obligation to make reparation to the Republic of Nicaragua for all injury caused to Nicaragua by certain breaches of obligations under customary international law and treaty law committed by the United States of America. During the war between the Contras and the Sandinistas, 30,000 people were killed. All right, so, and that's one thing that you'll notice if you look into Latin American history. And you look and see why is all the Latin Americans, why are all the Latinos coming up into America, right? Why are they trying to get here instead of staying in their own country? It's because of all the intervention, all the interventionist policies by the U.S. over the past 100 years, all right? More specifically in the latter half of the 20th century, all right? All those policies have led to those countries being corrupt and terrible to live in for the average citizen. Not that it's any better up here, obviously. It's still very corrupt and terrible for the average citizen here in America. It's just a little bit better because America stole all the resources. So we have all the resources here. Food is plentiful. All resources are plentiful up here. All right. So I said in the 1990 Nicaraguan election, a coalition of anti-Sandinista parties from both the left and the right of the political spectrum, led by Violeto Chamorro, the widow of Pedro Joaquin Chamorro Cardenal, defeated the Sandinistas. The defeat shocked the Sandinistas, who had expected to win. You see that right there? So the Sandinistas, they got ousted in the 89 election or the 90 election, and they were like, whoa, that's unexpected. They didn't expect to lose. It said exit polls of the Nicaraguans reported Chamorro's victory over Ortega was achieved with a 55% majority. All right, she was the first woman president in all of the Americas. All right, and Ortega vowed he would come back. He'd govern from below. Right, so pull strings in the shadows. All right. So it said in the '96 general election, Daniel Ortega and the Sandinistas of the FSLN, right, the Sandinistas, lost again. All right, to a different party, the Constitutional Liberation Party, or Liberal Party, excuse me, the Liberal Party. So they didn't even, Ortega didn't even win again until, what was it, 2006? Yes. Yeah, so he won again in 2006, and he's been in there ever since. All right, so what you got to think, though, in Ortega's lifetime, the U.S. has been intervening in his country, right? So he and the Sandinistas were not fans of that, and they see it going on around them, and they're trying to prevent it the best way they know how. The problem is they don't have the laws of God. That's the problem. I don't know if y'all noticed the flag here. The flag of Nicaragua is, basically an Illuminati pyramid in the middle of blue and white. All right, that's basically what it is. And so let's get into the scriptures and see. This is what happened. This is what happened when Northern Kingdom, because that's what Nicaragua is. That's Northern Kingdom Israelites. That is Zebulon. This is what happened when Northern Kingdom had a kingdom. All right, when we were still the Northern Kingdom, when Latinos and the indigenous over here had rulership. I'm gonna start here. This starts with us going into captivity here in 2 Kings 17. Then the king of Assyria came up throughout all the land and went up to Samaria and besieged it 3 years. All right. And I'll go ahead and get Deuteronomy 28 about the siege. Maybe I'll get Deuteronomy 28 a little later. But know that we will touch back on the siege and what ended up happening with, even in Bartolome de las Casas, he saw about the mother eating her child. All right. It said, in the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria took Samaria and carried Israel away into Assyria and placed them in Halah and in Habor by the river Gozan in the cities of the Medes. All right. So the children of Israel were among the Medes. That's Japhethites. That's why the northern kingdom looks different than southern kingdom. All right. Because they mixed and now it looks similar to the Medes. For so it was that the children of Israel had sinned against the Lord their God, which had brought them up out of the land of Egypt from under the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and had feared other gods. So that's the problem with the northern kingdom. We had fell to other gods and walked in the statutes of the heathen, whom the Lord cast out from before the children of Israel and of the kings of Israel, which they had made. Right. So that's our root. That's our root problem, is that we fell to other gods. We stopped worshiping the Lord our God. We stopped walking in his ways. That's how the Spaniards were even able to come against the northern kingdom in the first place. All right. And the children of Israel did secretly those things that were not right against the Lord their God. And they built them high places in all their cities, from the tower of the watchman to the fenced city. And they set them up images and groves in every high hill and under every green tree. And there they burnt incense in all the high places, as did the heathen whom the Lord carried away before them. All right. So as did the Canaanites. That's what he's saying there. And wrought wicked things to provoke the Lord to anger. You see that right there. For they served idols, whereof the Lord had said unto them, ye shall not do this thing. And it said, yet the Lord testified against Israel and against Judah by all the prophets and by all the seers, saying, turn ye from your evil ways, and keep my commandments and my statutes, according to all the law which I commanded your fathers, which I sent to you by my servants the prophets. All right, so God had always sent prophets to the people, but they refused to hearken. All right, and you read this in the Bible, like Elijah and Elisha, they were sent to the people, say, hey, return from your sins, stop sinning. Hosea was another. We're going to actually get Hosea. But let's go to Deuteronomy 28. Because in Deuteronomy 28, it talks about them coming against us. All right. So in Deuteronomy 28, verse 15, it says, but it shall come to pass, if thou wilt not hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe to do all his commandments and his statutes, which I command thee this day, that all these curses shall come upon thee and overtake thee. All right, so, because remember, Bartolome de las Casas mentioned the caciques or caciques and the potentates, right? Even the nobles of the people were brought to serve, right? So, verse 36. It says, the Lord shall bring thee and thy king, which thou shalt set over thee, unto a nation which neither thou nor thy fathers have known. Right? Because they didn't know the Spaniards. And there shalt thou serve other gods, wood and stone, forced into Catholicism. All right? So, from there, let's, verse 41. It says, thou shalt beget sons and daughters, but thou shalt not enjoy them, for they shall go into captivity. All right, and that's exactly what happened as we read to the native Nicaraguans. All right, so verse 49, it says, the Lord shall bring a nation against thee from far, from the end of the earth, as swift as the eagle flieth. Right, that's the symbol of imperial Spain, was the eagle. A nation whose tongue thou shalt not understand, because the people spoke Nahuatl and Nahuatl languages, Nahua languages, that did not speak Spanish. All right, and even Nahua is a devolved, is a corrupted form of Hebrew. All right, they just add like X's and T's into a lot of places where they don't need them. It says, a nation of fierce countenance which shall not regard the person of the old, nor show favor to the young. Right, so it talks about pregnant women were forced to do the same burdens as like a beast would. Right, they didn't care. And he shall eat the fruit of thy cattle and the fruit of thy land until thou be destroyed, which also shall not leave thee corn, wine, or oil, or the increase of thy kind, or the flocks of thy sheep, until he have destroyed thee. And see, we read about that in the book a brief account of the destruction of the Indies by Bartolome de las Casas. He said that, look, they eat up all the corn, right? There's nothing that the people can do anymore. There's nothing that, they could eat because the Spaniards eat up all the corn. All right? So, and then it goes on to say, besiege is talking about the sieges and how cities would fall because of the sieges. So it also says, and thou shalt eat the fruit of thine own body, the flesh of thy sons and of thy daughters, which the Lord thy God hath given thee, in the siege and in the straitness, wherewith thy enemies shall distress thee. You see that right there. So we see that right there, that the woman, she ate her own child. All right, that's a curse. That is a curse. All right, and so when talking about populations, verse 62, it says, and ye shall be left few in number, whereas ye were as the stars of heaven for multitude, because thou wouldest not obey the voice of the Lord thy God. See, that is exactly what happened to the people. That's what Bartolome de las Casas described. All right? All right. So, it says, and it shall come to pass that as the Lord rejoiced over you to do you good and to multiply you, so the Lord will rejoice over you to destroy you and to bring you to naught, and you shall be plucked from off the land whither thou goest to possess it. All right? So, we see that is exactly what happened to the people. All right? Because it wasn't their land anymore. It was the Spaniards' land. All right? So from there, let's go to Hosea. And actually, when talking about the rulers of the people, this is something that I forgot to mention. But if you read the history, you read that there was no good Northern Kingdom king. There just wasn't. The Jehu got close, but even Jehu went back to worship idols. All right? And that's exactly what it says here in Sirach. Is it 47? Let's see. Yeah, so Ephraim is the head of the Northern Kingdom. All right, Ephraim being the so-called Puerto Ricans, the head of the Northern Kingdom, the heir of Joseph. All right, he is the ruling tribe when it comes to the Northern Kingdom. All right. So sometimes when the Bible is talking about Ephraim, sometimes it's talking about a specific tribe. Sometimes it's talking about all the Northern Kingdom. And in this case, it is talking about all the Northern Kingdom. So it said, so the kingdom was divided, and out of Ephraim ruled a rebellious kingdom. Right. So Ephraim, not only, again, not just the tribe, but the whole kingdom, but specifically Jeroboam was the first Latino king in Israel, and he made idols for the people to worship. He was not a righteous king. It says, but the Lord will never leave off his mercy, neither shall any of his works perish, neither will he abolish the posterity of his elect, and the seed of him that loveth him he will not take away. Wherefore he gave a remnant unto Jacob, and out of him a root unto David. All right. Thus rested Solomon with his fathers, and of his seed he left behind him Rehoboam, even the foolishness of the people, and one that had no understanding, who turned away the people through his counsel. There was also Jeroboam the son of Nebat, who caused Israel to sin, and showed Ephraim the way of sin. So that time period of the split after the reign of Solomon, that time period was a very sinful time period, because you had Rehoboam, who did not listen to the counsel of the elders and followed sin. The same with Jeroboam. He caused Northern Kingdom to sin. You could even say worse than Rehoboam did. I would say worse. All right, so, and their sins were multiplied exceedingly, that they were driven out of the land. For they sought out all wickedness till the vengeance came upon them. All right. And in the next chapter, or is it chapter 49? I think it's chapter 49, because this is actually just talking about the prophets and Hezekiah. All right. In chapter 49, it says, and this is the point here. In chapter 49 and verse 4, it said, all except David, Hezekiah, and Josiah were defected, for they forsook the law of the Most High. Even the kings of Judah failed. Right? So, specifically, we're talking about the Northern Kingdom right now, but this right here says, then these were three Southern Kingdom kings. David was from Judah, Hezekiah was from Judah, and so was Josiah. All right? So that just shows you that all the Northern Kingdom fell off. Not the prophets, not necessarily all the people, but there was no righteous ruler. There was no righteous king that came from a Northern Kingdom seed. It just wasn't. All right? It is what it is. And it's the same thing with Daniel Ortega. That's why you see him doing what he's doing, because if we're being honest, he was never meant to rule. All right? not one man alone. When it comes to Northern Kingdom, what we got to do is we got to stand up as judges of the people, as elders of the people, as prophets to the people. We can be that, but we got to understand that our king is Christ. He is the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. That's what we got to understand. The Lord is the king. All right. We cannot try to consolidate power to ourselves the way that Daniel Ortega is doing. All right. He just wants to consolidate power to himself because that's what's in us. All right. That sinful nature, that's what's in us. Whenever we don't say, hey, look, I don't want to be the king. Christ is the king. Daniel Ortega wants to be the king. It is what it is. And that will never work. That will never work. All right. And in Hosea, it talks about the corruption of the kingdom. All right. Hosea 4. And starting with verse 1, it says, hear the word of the Lord, ye children of Israel. And specifically, Hosea, he did talk about both kingdoms, but he specifically talked about the northern kingdom the most. All right? Hear the word of the Lord, ye children of Israel. For the Lord hath a controversy with the inhabitants of the land, because there is no truth, nor mercy, nor knowledge of God in the land. You see that right there? So, God has a controversy with the northern kingdom specifically because there's no truth in the land. By swearing and lying and killing. Didn't we read a lot about how the Sandinistas were killing dissenters? Lying as far as like trying to silence the dissenters is what specifically Ortega is doing. And stealing, and a lot of people are claiming that he stole the election, right? A lot of people claim that now. Committing adultery, they break out and blood touch blood. And see, that's what we saw with the Contras and the Sandinistas, that civil war, is that blood touch blood. Therefore shall the land mourn, and everyone that dwelleth therein shall languish. With the beasts of the field, and with the fowls of heaven, yea, the fishes of the sea also shall be taken away. All right? So all of it is corrupt now. Same way that it was in the days of Noah. All right? All the sin that had went through the earth at that time, all the evil that was in the earth at that time, it corrupted the whole earth. God said, I got to start over. All right? It's the same thing. We are in the days of Noah again. The earth has to be judged. So it's not with water this time, it's with fire. All right? And everybody's going to have a little taste of it. Everybody's going to have a little taste of judgment come that day. All right? Yet let no man strive nor reprove another, for thy people are as they that strive with the priest. Right? So he's saying, look, you can't even correct them at this point. They won't listen. They'll argue with the priest. Therefore shalt thou fall in the day, and the prophet also shall fall with thee in the night, and I will destroy thy mother. My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Because thou hast rejected knowledge, I will also reject thee, that thou shalt be no priest to me, seeing thou hast forgotten the law of thy God. I will also forget thy children. You see that right there. So that's why the land has become wicked, because God has forgotten us. The same way that we have forgotten him, he said, I'm going to forget y'all too. All right. As they were increased, so they sinned against me. Therefore will I change their glory into shame. Right? And that's what happened. When Bartolome de las Casas showed up to Central America, he said, this land is beautiful and populous. Look what's going on here. Then what happened? The Spaniards judged the people. They did their wickedness. The Spaniards, they did their wickedness, executing the judgment of the Lord on the people. And boom, now it's shame. Now it's reproach. Now it's evil. America doing the same thing with their interventionist policies, not as brutal and not as direct as the Spaniards, but with their interventionist policies, they ruined the country as well, the country of Nicaragua, and turned the glory into shame. They eat up the sin of my people, and they set their heart on their iniquity. And there shall be, like people, like priests, and I will punish them for their ways, and reward them their doings. He said, I'm going to reward them their doings, right? You reap what you sow, all right? So, from there, I'm going to jump down. It says, verse 15, this is actually really what led to the division that you see in the New Testament, the division between Jew and Gentile, right? The division between southern and northern kingdom. Like the woman said to Jesus, hey, the Jews have no dealings with the Samaritans. This is why. It says, though thou, Israel, played a harlot, yet let not Judah offend. And come not ye unto Gilgal, neither go ye up to Bethaven, nor swear the Lord liveth. Right? So, he told Judah, hey, stop dealing with the northern kingdom. They they're going off. This is while Judah still had their kingdom, right? It said, for Israel slideth back as a backsliding heifer. Now the Lord will feed them as a lamb in a large place. Ephraim is joined to idols. Let him alone. All right, so the prophet Hosea literally speaking to the Judites here, saying, hey, leave Ephraim alone. Don't mess with him. Don't partake in the same evils. Don't partake in the same sins. You won't receive of the same plagues. All right, but as we read and as we know, I can go back to 2 Kings 17 on this one, because it says about Judah, concerning Judah. All right, it says, where is it at? Verse 18 in 2 Kings 17, it says, therefore the Lord was very angry with Israel and removed them out of his sight. There was none left but the tribe of Judah only. Also, Judah kept not the commandments of the Lord their God, but walked in the statutes of Israel, which they made. Right? So, Hosea, or rather the people did not take heed to Hosea's advice. Right? He didn't say, do the same thing that Ephraim's doing. He said, leave them alone. They went to idols. Judah, hey, you stay strong for the Lord. But that's not what happened. Judah fell off too. So, verse 20, and the Lord rejected all the seed of Israel and afflicted them and delivered them into the hand of spoilers until he had cast them out of his sight. See that right there? So, I do want to end on a positive note, though, of course. It's not all, an everlasting captivity, right? Back in Hosea, but chapter 1, it says, yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured nor numbered. And it shall come to pass that in the place where it was said unto them, ye are not my people, there it shall be said unto them, ye are the sons of the living God. So here, we're not called God's people. We're called Latinos, Hispanics, Native Americans, and blacks, whatever, African American, whatever. But over here is where it's going to be said, you are the children of the living God. Right? It's time to come back to the Lord. Then shall the children of Judah and the children of Israel be gathered together and appoint themselves one head, that one head being Jesus Christ. And they shall come up out of the land, he will deliver us, for great shall be the day of Jezreel, right? So God always had this plan. Even when his people fall off, he's going to call us back. He's going to call us to do what he has called us to do, and serve him. That's what that is. That's serving him. So again, ending on a positive note here, in Revelation 7, talks about specifically all the 12 tribes coming back. All right. So it said, and I heard the number of them which were sealed, and there were sealed 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel, sealed with the law of God. All right. I just want to prove that real quick. The seal that he's talking about is in Isaiah 8. This is the seal that the Lord is talking about. All right. 8 and verse 16. It says, bind up the testimony, seal the law among my disciples. All right, so the same thing that we fell from, that's what God is calling us back to. That's the laws of God. All right, we should have listened to the prophets back in the day, but we didn't. So then we got cursed, like what it said in Deuteronomy 28. And now it's time to come back to the laws of God. And there will be 144,000. It says of the tribe of Judah were sealed 12,000. That's so-called African Americans. Of the tribe of Reuben were sealed 12,000. That's your Seminole and Creek family Indians. The tribe of Gad were sealed 12,000. That's the rest of the First Nations and indigenous of the continental U.S. Of the tribe of Asher were sealed 12,000. That would be your Colombians and your South Americans generally. Of the tribe of Naphtali were sealed 12,000. That's your Argentinians and Chileans. Said of the tribe of Manasseh were sealed 12,000. That's your Cubans. Of the tribe of Simeon were sealed 12,000. That's your Dominicans. Of the tribe of Levi were sealed 12,000. That's your Haitians. Of the tribe of Issachar were sealed 12,000. That's your Mexicans. Of the tribe of Zebulun were sealed 12,000. That's your Central Americans. Of the tribe of Joseph were sealed 12,000. That's your Puerto Ricans, aka Ephraim. And of the tribe of Benjamin were sealed 12,000. That's your West Indians. All right. Speaking of the people here in the Western Hemisphere. All right. God's people are scattered all over the world. But the point is the Nicaraguans can't come back to the Most High. You're not too far gone. I know there's exiles going every which way trying to flee the country. But even if you're going to stay in the country of Nicaragua, hey, it's time to turn back to the Most High God. All right, keep his laws, statutes, and commandments. That's the only way you're going to get deliverance is through by his son, Jesus Christ. All right, now I mean the white guy, Caesar Borgia, talking about the guy that looks more like this. All right, so that's the description in Revelation 1.